Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Hen House at Home Fall Book Tour. I'm Toby Harper, Deputy Director of Red Hen Press.
I'm Monica Fernandez, the Media Manager.
We are so excited to host what will be a fantastic and engaging conversation between Sebastian Matthews and Vievee Francis in just a few minutes. Before we get to that, we just want to wish a very happy publication day to two Red Hen books. The new memoir, Pretzel, Houdini, and Olive by Deborah Thompson, which is a memoir about how dogs saved her life. And We Need to Talk, a memoir about wealth by Jennifer Risher, who's recently profiled the New York Times. Very excited to bring those two books into the world. But tonight, we are here to celebrate Beyond Repair, Living in a Fractured State, a new memoir and essays from Sebastian Matthews. And welcoming Sebastian on now.
Hey, thank you, Toby.
Oh.
Thank you, Monica. Hey, V.
Hey, Sebastian.
All right, so I think we're starting in. I wanted to thank Toby and Monica and Kate Gale and the rest of the Red Hen crew for putting this on, and for Vievee for agreeing to doing this conversation, this reading with me, and for everybody who's out there in the Zoom land, thank you for coming tonight. I thought what we'd do is I want to just give a quick context for the book and for it's kind of a backstory for our friendship, Vievee and my friendship. And then I'm going to do a small reading, and then we're going to do a little Q&A and segue into Vievee reading, and then back and forth a little bit. And then I'll finish up by doing some reading, and we'll end with a little bit of conversation. So it's going to flow, hopefully, in a nice way. And I'm looking forward to hearing. I think Vievee's going to be reading new work. So. But what I want to do first is just to give you a context. Beyond Repair comes out of, in a lot of ways, Beginner's Guide to a Head-On Collision, which was a book I published with Red Hen in 2017. And it tells the story of my family being in a car wreck, a head-on collision, and the aftermath, the recovery, and in some ways the recovery of the recovery. And it was 2011. I don't think we were really back to our full selves till 2014, which is where that book kind of ends. So that's a hybrid book of poetry and prose. This book, Beyond Repair, is short prose encounters, nonfiction, and some photographs. And though the book starts with a bit of a memoirish opening that sets the story of 2011 or 2012, and kind of the year after the accident, how PTSD and trauma, especially around driving, was still a problem for me. And kind of, I wanted to get the reader a sense of me trying to reemerge into a world that was new or shifted. We were suddenly shifted out of Obama and we're into the Trump world. And it seemed like things had shifted in a way that was divisive, us versus them, blue versus red. And Vievee and I met really around that time, about a year or so after the accident. She was a visiting writer at Warren Wilson College undergrad, where I was teaching. We didn't know each other, but we were asked to read together. And I was reading poems and pieces from that book, Beginner's Guide. And I think that reading was very powerful. I knew it was for me. And we really kind of bonded as friends after it. And I think back, and it kind of amazes me that our friendship is really just, you've known me only from the most fragile state that I was in at the beginning of that recovery time until now. And we've together kind of weathered, as we all have, so much cultural, storm. And we talked briefly about, and basically what I wanted to say was that ever since that reading, we've continued to be in conversation. And so I wanted to just, to say hey to you and give you a chance to say hi to folks and not just be a talking head. How you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well, and I'm just thinking about what you're saying. It's been a years long conversation, and I don't think everyone gets to have that. And I think it's particularly special because we're both in the field. We love writing, we love poetry, we love different forms, and all of that seems to mesh together. But yes, I would say that meeting through trauma would probably be accurate.
You were struggling with some physical stuff, and
I was, which wasn't resolved until recently, and I had no idea what it was.
Yeah.
And struggling to walk up and down those mountains. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, somebody should have told me before I left Detroit how challenging mountains are. But, they used to say that it takes about 5 years to really know the mountains or to get to know the mountains. And once you're there 5 years, you don't want to leave. But I think I was only there 3 years, perhaps 3 or 4. And it already hooked me. They were already haunting. As I see the mountains behind you on the wall. But that reading, I'm glad you brought that reading up where we met, because I couldn't imagine going through what you had gone through in a head-on collision. And you were reading a poem where you were forgiving the man for crossing into your lane, a heart attack and crossing into your lane. And you were overcome. And that act of forgiveness is amazing. And I was reading about racial trauma, particularly coming from the South, and then there I was back in the South.
Yeah.
So I think there's sometimes a bonding that can happen in that type of thing, and that reading, that was it.
Yeah, and I may be overstepping, but it feels like maybe the trauma that I went through and my family went through and struggling with that gave me a perspective that I might not have had as a middle-aged white guy, and maybe allowed me to see something culturally that you can't ignore, right? As a Black woman, you have to deal with that all the time. And I could easily ignore a lot of things if I wanted to with all the white privilege and all that. And I feel like something kind of scales came off my eyes or something, and I was looking at the world differently than I had been before. And I think a lot of the Beyond Repair pieces, which I'll start reading in a second, seem to be about trying to see the everyday life anew and try to encounter the world in a different way, from a different vantage.
When I met you, it definitely seemed that way. And you invited me to read in your class, and you were very open to work, the work that I was doing at the time. And it did seem that you were open to the world in a way that seemed vulnerable, particularly vulnerable. Yeah.
Well, I'll read a couple pieces to start, and then maybe we can have some back and forth. You might want to ask me some questions, and I have some questions for you about some of your new work. But one of the things that I found, first I want to read a piece called Blue that comes relatively early in the book. It's the book is dedicated to Vievee, and it's dedicated to my buddy Curtis Bauer. They were definitely readers from the book, in a ways muses for the book, and they so this piece speaks about our friendship in a way that I think might be a nice way to start this evening. It's called Blue. All these pieces are 1 to 2 pages. Vievee writes of her recent travels in Barbados. Curtis sends me emails during his 6 months in Buenos Aires. She's staying in a hotel in the capital, and even though she has friends and colleagues around her and work to do in the day, still she says she is lonely, out of sorts in the midday heat. He, despite having the Spanish and being a seasoned traveler, often finds himself disoriented and confused, in the wrong line, unsure of the social situation he has stumbled into. Curtis works hard, he writes, to function inside these states of dislocation and faulty translation. Each day he goes out for a walk, often finding himself in some strange quarter of the city. He notes, light, there's so much of it. Even the wind is full of color this morning. When he goes into a shop and talks to the clerk, the guy seems surprised by his Spanish, even though it is impeccable, and pretends not to understand. This dislocated feeling also holds true for Vievee, for whom everything feels different and new. She's heartened when she sees herself in some of the people and appreciates how they look at her. She enjoys the fish, the spices, the clean sheets she enters for the afternoon nap. She's having a good time. Which makes me wonder if displacement works better for what I'm thinking about here, or maybe I'm already talking about my own experience, thrown into relief by my friend's travels. But I am displaced too, despite having been so place-bound for so long and so shut in. living in a bubble inside a bubble inside a bubble as I do. Maybe it's the state of mind part I'm thinking of, being dislocated as a form of depression or insecurity, not so much in the wrong location, but out of place inside oneself. My anthropologist friend John tells a story about being an idiot dog when you're out of your element. You know the basic things to do and to survive, but you don't know what to do or how to be when you're lost and without bearings. It's a great story, and I won't tell it in full here, but its punchline gets enacted by an Aboriginal elder. He's trying to communicate to an anthropologist staying in his village, pointing to the sky to show him where rainwater comes from. It strikes me that maybe both Vievee and Curtis are feeling lonely, that they're wrapped up in some sort of restless state I can only name being blue, but that also could be called feeling alive. Or again, maybe it's just me, sitting here on my back porch, living vicariously through them. I feel a brand of sadness that helps me inhabit my body, the kind that comes when you're out in the day, when life overwhelms, a pervasive aloneness. I'll take this blue feeling and use it to my advantage, you say under your breath. Look how good I look in blue. Many of these pieces, most of these pieces are just straight encounters with people, family and friends, and more strangers. There are some pieces like this where I kind of try to talk a little bit about the themes, try to tell a little bit inside a lot of showing. I want to read you the first piece of the book, and then maybe we can talk a little bit, because the first encounters I had were often very fraught. I think part of it was that I was very triggered, and Vievee and I have talked about this. I say that I'm a fight person in terms of fight, flight, or freeze, and there's a kind of question of, maybe there's a little bit of freezing inside of the fighting, but certainly when I was trying to get myself back, I had broken my feet and my legs and my ribs, and I'd been in a wheelchair and had to learn how to walk again. And so I'm on these suburban streets with my dogs trying to take walks, and all these white guys in these trucks were coming by and like flipping me off and trying to run me off the road. And I feel like maybe I was overreacting a little bit, but I also felt like maybe I was seeing something that was going on in the broader sense of things, and was attuned to it, maybe oversensitive, but at the same time, feeling vulnerable. So this piece is called White Men in Trucks. What is it about them that shoots a brief goose of fear into my bloodstream? Is it imminent threat sounding in the revved engine? Derision caught in the side view mirror? Or plain old disdain drumming its fingers on the driver's side door? A little of each? All I know is I'm walking through our suburban neighborhood and a truck barrels past, not slowing or moving over. Then another swerves around the bend, almost clipping my dog, meeting my upraised hands with a jetted middle finger. And another drives right up behind me and rides my bumper all the way up the hill. Just yesterday, downtown Asheville, a man steps around me in line and interrupts the conversation I'm having with an acquaintance. He's showing me a photo of his 5-year-old boy holding up a large fish caught in one of those Biltmore ponds. The man steps in close. That a bream? He's got a smile on his face that I read as hostile. He wants me gone, but the father ignores the man, finishing his sentence about the peaceful water and how quiet it is out there with his boy. Almost mystical, he says. Then the man interrupts again, smile getting bigger. Hey, Mike, that a bream your boy is holding? And then Mike bursts into an equally large smile. Hell no, he drawls, and lists all the fish his boy has or could have caught. I don't fish, so I don't follow, nor can I make clear sense of the quick-fire exchange. The two men have fallen into a bravado-fueled, friendly back and forth. It's as if they're flashing each other signs or showing each other their good old boy badges. I feel as though I am being erased from the moment. No trespassing sign staked at my feet. The men chat and laugh in the corner as I slip back in line. Later at dusk, one more truck appears. It slows to a crawl and follows me up the street. What's with people these days? Are they so sick of their lives that they need to lash out at strangers? To hate them for being something different or foreign? I turn to face my nemesis who has rolled down the window. What do you want? The man smiles and remains silent. There's power and a comfort with silence. How old is that dog of yours? He asks, leaning out the window. He's talking about the lab, just a puppy, bounding over and standing up as if seeking the man's arms. The man laughs. The look in his eyes is pure sadness. So Vievee, I'm curious, kind of you've been in Asheville, North Carolina. You came out of the city, you came out of Detroit, and you came to a place that's super ultra white in a lot of ways, and struggles with a huge gentrification issue. What do you have a question for me about that piece, or do you want to just talk about something? I mean, I'm kind of trying to get us to get back and forth.
No, I'm glad that you started off with white men in trucks, especially after discussing the trauma, because that's one of the things I think that happens with trauma. It's easy to misread people because we're so triggered all the time. And in the era we're in right now, we're all triggered constantly, and we're all going through the trauma of the pandemic. So I think people will relate to that. That's a particularly evocative piece because of all the stereotypes around that type of man. And what does he want? He wants to talk about the puppy. Maybe he's lost his own, which losing an animal is very difficult. It took me years to get over losing the cat. So I think that kind of misreading, to write something like that, is a warning against misreading. Is you working out the trauma and through the trauma and recognizing that you're getting triggered and may not be seeing what's there. And for me, I relate to that because that's the question for me. When things happen to me, I have to ask myself, is this just a person of a particular character doing something, that I might not like?
Yes.
Or is this racism? What is this?
Right. Is it microaggression, or is it a micro awkwardness, or is it
exactly? It's easy for me to mistake what is truly aggressive for a mistake, or a mistake for what is truly aggressive. And because it's so very constant. So I think I would definitely say that I suffer from extraordinary racial trauma. I want to say from my childhood, but that wouldn't be true because what I experienced in my childhood is iterated again and again. But I had a white man in trucks moment. It was a very short moment, and I think that it was in going to the Appalachians. I think I had filters too, even though I didn't think I did, even though I didn't want them. Those filters were there, and I'd wanted to go to the Appalachians for a very long time to visit, not necessarily to live. So I met a young student, and she looked at me, and I didn't know why she was staring, and I assumed she was staring negatively. And then she told me that that sure was a pretty dress, and she said it in one of the deepest mountain accents I've ever heard. And she was a delight. And the whole time I was at Warren Wilson, I found the students from the mountains who are stereotyped so constantly to be my fiercest students. So sincere, so depthful. And then there were things that they did carry with them. Many of them were very capable with music. And so I think we all have those moments,
I totally agree. And this book is full of, Claudia Rankin did a great job with Citizen of really putting that microaggression out there. It's like, this is
absolutely,
this is real, and this is what we're dealing with, and let's not pretend. And I found that after that book, I saw it everywhere, and I saw myself walking into it from one angle, possibly being misunderstood or putting my foot in my mouth. I saw it as a standby, as somebody watching it as a passerby, seeing it happen, wondering if I was seeing it happen. It was just suddenly like, wow, we are in this place now where everybody is struggling to understand each other, and everybody seems to be mad at each other. One of the pieces early in the book, I was going to read it, but I think I'm going to jump to reading Selma next. But I had early on, the other kind of experience can be very transformative, kind of like what you described with the young woman. I was really in pain that one day, about a year and a half out, and I was downtown and I was getting into an elevator in an old building on Wall Street downtown, and this woman came out of the elevator, and I got in, or maybe the other way around. I got out and she was walking in, and she looked at me and she said, "What floor am I on?" And I just had something, and I was so preoccupied. Pain does that, as you know. But something about it. And I said to her, "Where are you going?" And she looked at me and she looked so lost. So I put my hand, stopped the door, and I asked her, what she's doing. And she put her hand up to her head and said, "My hair," a couple times. I didn't really read what she was doing. But then she told me she had Alzheimer's, and I was like, okay, and so I kind of steered her away from the main street, and I brought her back up to another floor, and we eventually found a hair salon, and she was like, "Oh, my hair." And she's like, "That's where I was supposed to go." And I let her into the room, and her hairstylist saw her, and I knew that she was safe and that her partner would be there at some point. And I let her go. And it was like, it was just a touching moment. And I barely got out of my own head to be able to be a present citizen to help her. And I felt like, okay, these are the moments that I want. I want to be awake, and I want to have a transformative moment. But so many times you miss those opportunities, and so many times you don't have a chance to encounter people that way. So I was pretty much between those two experiences, White Men and Trucks and this piece called Her Hair. I began to be very conscious of wanting to try to make myself step out and encounter people. I wanted, after being a shut-in for so many years, I wanted to be out in the world. And, our friendship was one way that I did push myself a little. I didn't want to make new friends. I really didn't want to be right.
You didn't.
I told you a couple times, no, I don't want to do this. I can't do this.
I think you didn't show up at a coffee house like twice. And the second time I'm like, "Hey, what's wrong with you? You missed our appointment." You're like, "Oh, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
We might not need friends." I'm like, "That's cool, but we can still chat."
Yeah, you tricked me. But you and I, you remember this because I think you're going to read a piece about it as well, or a piece that has part of our experience in it. It's a much bigger piece than just that. But this piece is about the experience of going to see the movie Selma with you. It's dedicated to V, and it's called Selma. Just a page. King has just accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, and now 4 schoolgirls are walking down the steps of a church, deep inside their lives, cradled inside the building, walking and talking and laughing. My friend leaves over in her movie theater seat and whispers, "You know what's going to happen, don't you?" And I'm not thinking, but then I know, in a split second, that these are the girls in Birmingham, and I avert my eyes just as the bomb goes off. And when I look again, windows are exploding and the girls are thrown in the air over the banister. And as the camera lingers on the carnage and the dead bodies, I start to cry, devastated by the act, but also out of relief, for my friend has tried to save me from another blind head-on inside the head crash, one more shell-shock moment. Whenever King sits next to a window, I wince and wait for a brick or a Molotov cocktail to come flying through the window. How can anyone live with that much death hovering outside the window? Every time a protester gets slammed to the ground by a cop, or a man or a woman gets punched in the face or knocked into a wall or billy clubbed or shot in the stomach, I understand that I am meant to make some sense of the violence, the hate enacted, to feel it in my bones. When the marchers are met on this bridge with a wall of hate and vitriol, my friend and I hold hands and take the beatings full on. Neither of us cares to step back from fear. I don't want my own shell shock to keep me from the painful truths of our world. Isn't that always the fight? Not to slip into sleepwalking, not to be overwhelmed and shut down in boredom or abject fear, not to let fatigue and depression and dread bring you down, not to let overload and triggers shut me down, to walk up onto that bridge hand in hand, or sit at the desk by the window and face down anything that threatens to bring us down.
I definitely remember that moment, and I remember you were triggered, your body had been so broken, and I thought all of that brokenness, I wanted you to know before the moment, and
I wasn't paying. I should have known, but somehow you knew I didn't, and
I knew from the look on your face. It was and
so,
because you were my friend, so you are my friend, so we know each other's faces. And
it's a powerful way to start that movie because it just puts you on your heels. I think it comes up in the poem. We can talk about it after you read, but I don't think I understood exactly the full realm of what you were experiencing either. I think I didn't really understand yet how much you had gone through as a young girl, avert some of this pain and suffering from what it means to be part of that kind of forced segregation or forced integration that comes out of something like that. And so there are aspects of what you were going through, but we just knew that we were both, I think, scared shitless and trying not to be and trying to be brave. And it's a powerful movie, obviously.
And
yeah.
it's a movie, but I mean, it's the same feeling every time I'm looking at a video now.
Yes.
With so much trauma, and it triggers the childhood for me, as it does for so many African Americans. So I'll read this if that's okay.
Perfect.
So the poem's entitled 1965, Harriet Richardson wipes Galway Canal's face after state troopers beat him with a billy club, for Matthew. In Selma that day, the photograph, it's the way she's looking at him, not his name, his pallor, not the city nor the event, not even the blood on his neck. When I saw the picture, I realized someone cared enough to take it. There was only one lens. Then the entire world wasn't always watching. She pressed that cloth to his neck, as intimate as a kiss whispered into the channel of an ear, spontaneously, sudden and overwhelming as a father's embrace after a father's failure to embrace. I was 2 years old. It was before I knew what I was born into. It would have been illegal for me to have married my husband. My husband stares at the picture, but a man so compassionate cannot easily take in its lack. It takes the violating or the violated to know. You know why Galway was there. Why pretend? The reward of courage is this. My husband told his parents he would marry me, period. He expected his parents to live up to the values they espoused. They have. If I cry, my blue-eyed father-in-law, whose father left Germany in the nascent rise of Hitler, cries. Galway's eye to Harriet's brown is mine. Look at the way he looks at her, like a sun rising twice to be Galway that day, looking up in the face of the tender after terror. Be the grace of gratitude, he being there, she being her. Years later, a movie about that day in Selma pressed time into a black box. A friend my age gripped my hand. I imagined I knew him then, saw us as children together, wondered if he might have wiped the blood from my mouth. He thought my tears were for those on the screen, but I cried too for my child self, the loneliness from a playground that has never left me. Harriet did not leave Galway. Finding him hurt after the billy club struck Purchase made her even more herself. My husband always knows where to find me. A husband too young to have seen the signs but has learned them says, I wish you knew people like Harriet, like Galway when you were little. I wish I had been there. So he doesn't mind the care a friend shows me now. We held hands in a dark place and it was a brief balm, enough to keep me from fainting. And my husband draws me home, like a sandbox friend waiting for you after being punished for something you didn't do. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. I love that poem. You don't see it on the page, but it's kind of spread out, like not like necessarily totally like prose, but kind of full field. It's a hybrid piece in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So I wrote this question down a couple of days ago. You mentioned in a recent talk that you've been frustrated of late by old forms, especially with what's been going on in the world. You said, I need a new way to create something to hold both possibility and pain of this time. Can you elaborate on this? And that's my question with that poem in mind. Kind of did the form play a part, or in the writing of the poem? Did you feel like you're breaking out of old patterns, or how did that poem come out? Like, where did that
It did. The form did play a part because when I first wrote the piece, I wrote it in a traditional lyric format. I was looking at the lines, and the lines became the most important element of the poem, really, for reading and following it. But there were so many moments breaking into other moments, and I decided I needed to extend the line or ignore the line altogether and put more pressure just on those moments. And I wanted it compressed together so that excuse me, so that it would be difficult to see what was present and what was past.
Mm.
I wanted them kind of squeezed together because in my mind, especially when I'm triggered, it's often difficult to see what's the present moment or whether or not I'm reacting to a past moment.
Yes. Yeah, and there's some beautiful moment where inside the second part of the poem where you're talking about seeing the movie, it connects in your mind back to the moment of the photograph of those two, Harriet and Galway, and you imagine it's just a beautiful kind of fusion of past and present.
Yeah, and if people haven't seen that photograph, they should see that. I remember the first time I saw it. I think, well, this goes back to what you're saying about her hair. And that is attentiveness, paying attention, actually looking at each other as human beings. And we can't do that if we don't pay attention. So these encounters are more than just momentary. They're building our capacity for empathy.
Yes, exactly. There's the sense of you put it actually at one point. Where is it? Re-seeing the banal through paying attention, as you described some of the pieces of my
Yes, and rethinking what banality is. I think Americans are easily and quickly bored, and too much so. And it can move through cultures too. So some cultures are more bored or more easily bored than others. And I definitely think that it's important to attend to every moment.
Oh, me too. And I think right now, especially with so many chances to just kind of decide that, this side doesn't agree with you and I'm going to feel this way and everything's just written in stone and no one's going to change, nothing's going to change. I feel like that's a real deadly mindset. You got to break out of it. And it's hard in the pandemic right now. It's funny. This book is more, in some ways, it's poignant in ways I wouldn't have expected, because when I was shut in from the accident, I felt a lot of the ways that I hear people describing feeling from the pandemic, and that shut in feeling and that disconnect, and you're not supposed to be around people. And I feel like even more so right now, it's important to try to make connection, from that, you don't touch each other, you're further apart, you're not so much in public spaces, but just still, you got to find ways.
You wrote about that exact thing in an interview recently. I can't remember where I read it, but how the pandemic, these distances, the separation, this lack of physicalness, and connecting it to the trauma you had to go through,
Yeah.
kind of being separated in a hospital room, away from your wife and son.
Yeah.
The thing, yeah.
Yeah, there's some real, I think people are going through some seriously devastating moments. If a loved one is dying and you can't be near them, it's a difficult time. It's sure, for sure. Is there another poem you'd like to read, and then we can talk about it a little bit? Then I'll maybe read some stuff. What do you think?
If you promise after I read to discuss the Kazim Ali quote that in your book, okay. So I'll read 2 or 3. I'm reading from my screen. Returns. And what did I expect going back down south? I could walk the sidewalks. I could look anyone in the eye. I could swim in the pools. I could. And I ate at fine restaurants where the chef greeted me and asked me how my meal was. And I ordered a simple plate at a simple diner, and no one looked up any more than usual. And the beaches welcomed me, and the chains of hotels on those beaches, and not one person said nigra. And did you think I wouldn't say it here? I went back after saying I would never go back, after a childhood lost to adult desires, without a sword or a gun, without a bitter word or a rude glance, like a fractured saint, like a saint with every bone fractured. I walked with a limp. I smiled with half my teeth, and I was ready to die in the war begun before I was born. But I couldn't find the battlefield. And the field my mother would have worked as a child was a parking lot. And I sat between the lines and cried for what I would never have, justice. And the tanks within me rusted, and the bombs imploded in what was left. Now, what I see is a lie, and what you see is a shell. The shore. Now, before I read the shore, I don't know if you know this, Sebastian, but there are two poems around the shore that are just two of my favorite poems. And one is yours, Lines Composed, etc. And the other is by Robert Fanning, and I think it's Song of the Sea to the Shore. It's a sonnet, a couple of sonnets. So this is my own shore poem, if you will. The Shore. In a nondescript hotel in South Texas, I fell in love with a couple. There in the dim hallway, with rugs that were clean enough but darkly patterned to hide the stains, so who knows? Her back was against the wall, her arms up and around his neck. He was bent down to kiss her, to press his body into hers. Their bodies were fluid, two waves not crashing but moving through each other. I watched them from the other end of the hallway. Surprised to see them, I halted. Doesn't another's passion make us want? They never saw me. I didn't stay long and stayed silent. She was not his wife. His love was palpable. His hands were tender, not quick, slow, not furtive. That press. I have been witness to such passion more than once and more than most. On a common street in Manhattan, in a nondescript restaurant whose patrons, too young to value discretion or quiet, spoke in loud voices and fell drunkenly over the tables. I saw a friend through the oversized windows, the street lit by random lights. He drew her up into his body. She was no friend of mine. She followed me to follow him. She found him and drew his face down to hers. They kissed in a way that said they had kissed many times before, and perhaps it had been a long time. The kiss was long and deep, and I ate my steak au poivre bloody under sauce, and waited for them to finish, for him to come back to the table after rushing out to take a call. They never saw me watching, didn't even look up. He swept her up as if his entire body longed for a certain kind of completion. Her hair, so like his mother's, he might have cried into it. Where is the shame in that? She was not his wife. I am not his judge. I was on the shore, only a witness to the oceanic, dangerous, tidal, reckless, and always. I think I'll stop there.
That's a great poem.
I never know. I have to think about it. You know, I don't do any social media, so I don't exactly know how my poems land when they land.
It's hard with this kind of scene. We can't see people. Maybe I should read that Lines Composed.
That is one of my favorite poems. I'd love to hear that.
Well, you gave me the heads up that maybe I should print it out. So
I did. You heard that.
This is a poem that I wrote before I knew you, and before I started either of these books that I've been talking about. And you often tell me to write more lyric poems, and this is maybe one of my more lyric poems. It's called Lines Composed While Washed Up on Shore. Where did I go? I can't say. The waters were dark and bitter. The plankton told stories of hidden text dissolved in the waves. There was this lost hour when I became a cloud of blood and the sharks sliced through me like bullets in slow motion. I do know that I dropped all ballast and floated free, though I won't say for an eternity. That cliche is not true because it sounds so good, like a name tag placed on a whale. This part may have come in a dream, but a battalion of mermaids cast me as their private prisoner and took turns giving me salty mouth to mouth. I tried to embrace one, but ripped my hands on her coral. Their breath wreathed out like seaweed. Really, there's not much to tell. Time passed. In my delirium, I asked you to join me in the waves.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You go ahead.
I think that's important. It's important that you read your more a lyrical poem because you write hybrid work.
Yeah.
And it's great for people to hear the range of your voice. And I think for people that do hybrid work, that range is important.
Yeah, no, I agree. I want to make a quick shift, if you don't mind, and ask you to maybe help me kind of describe what I want to talk about briefly, because I want to read a couple pieces set in and around Callaloo. One of the things that, as our friendship deepened and we began to talk about literature, I really was able to, Vievee kind of just very, very quietly kind of turned me back towards a journal that I had read before in small bits and pieces, Callaloo, which is an African diaspora literature and art, the African diaspora of literature and art. It's an incredible journal, and it's also a set of workshops, and it's an incredible conference. And I didn't really realize when I was reading it years back just how amazing and what depth and range it had. And so I began to re-explore it and deepen and really, in some ways, for the first time, get really involved in those journals. And I fell in love with them because they're such incredible combinations of academic and creative literature and criticism. Can you add a little bit about what you've been involved with Callaloo for years, and you brought me to, I began to go to the conferences first as a visitor, then finally in Oxford as a full-time participant. It really changed my life in many ways, my writing life, but also it deepened my personal life. Can you talk a little bit about Callaloo so people have a context for it?
Well, I could talk about Callaloo forever. I love Callaloo. In some ways, I could say Callaloo started my own creative life because the editor, Dr. Charles Rowell, was allowing anyone to publish inside of it. You didn't have to be Northern, you didn't have to be urban, and my background was initially neither. And when I started talking with you, I think it just came up kind of naturally, kind of organically. And I'd also been a part of Cave Canem as a participant, as a fellow. But Callaloo as a journal, it's open for publishing for anyone of the African diaspora or anyone in conversation with the African diaspora. And that's what the key is for me, who's in conversation with us. And you had already been, and you had friends who were of all stripes, and then musically, you were jazz aficionado and this type of thing. You already had a lot of inroads in culturally inside. And, you're friends with some of the major artists of our day who are African-American. So when we were talking, it felt really easy to talk to you about it, but you're absolutely right to experience Callaloo, particularly, I think, the conferences. It's a different model altogether.
Yeah, it's so different.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I mentioned that there was a lot of journals, synthesize criticism and creative work, but the conferences themselves at every level, not just said, okay, we have some critical work, we have some creative work. They were fused on the site at the moment when somebody had a talk. there would be creative respondents to a critical lecture. There'd be a critical response to a poetry reading. The audience would be able to respond. It was this kind of call and response. It was such a different kind of conference that I've ever been to. And it felt like by the time the first day or two, everybody was a smaller, it's not a huge conference. People seemed to be all in it together, all thinking, all talking, all arguing, all conversing, at the same time. And then it was spilling. I remember for me, it was a challenging experience. I was a bit like, what am I supposed to, why am I here? Am I supposed to be here? I'm a white guy. Am I just kind of tourist? And finally I was at a bar with some of your friends and some people, my new friends. And one of the young men said, kind of basically told me to shut up without saying it. He just basically said, you fit where you fit, man. And by the way, we all fit where we fit here. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. It's not an easy place to fit. You got to find your place. In some ways, it's a very easy place to fit, but you have to be comfortable in your own skin it's a beautiful world that I'd love to be a part of. And if you haven't read the journal, folks, grab it and read it. And then start reading back issues, because it is an amazing encyclopedia of art and literature and criticism of such a range of work at so many levels.
It's been really fun to share Callaloo with you, and you jumped in with both feet. I mean, you came to England, you've gone to
got on a panel that scared me.
And I think you were at conference in DC and the conference in New York. I mean, and you started that journey with the Vermont Studio Center. So many of the workshop persons have been able, workshop fellows have been able to, have a place to write.
That's been a great connection.
And feel good. So yeah, but I would say that, well, you tell me, how has Callaloo shifted your work, do you think? How has it worked for you?
It's challenged me to be more historical and more political, to see the dynamic of America at an international level. Like, if you talk about like racism in America, you can't ignore the connections to the Caribbean and overseas in England. You got to remember the connections to different parts of Africa. You got to read the literatures of those places. We're living in a bit of a kind of bubble sometimes in our American literature, and it required me to broaden my scope of thinking and try to be smarter about approaching subject matter, like slowing down and doing more research in a way. It's a very serious term.
Yeah, and it's I see it globally too. I think Callaloo opened me up in that same way. And
and Curtis both. Curtis is a translator and a lot of Spanish work, and he's got an international bent too. And I feel like Callaloo and where you've approached things, and that's the challenge, is to get more global. And I think it's important. I kind of want to read
to attend a conference. He should be sitting in one of those seats, just watching, because the conference is so unique. There is nothing like it. Yeah,
no, it really isn't, and very dynamic at all levels. I'm going to read a piece about not the conference, but you invited me down to speak to some of your students at a workshop in Chapel Hill.
Oh yes,
and then we all hung out. It was Fred Degar. Is that? I'm sorry, I never pronounce it.
Yeah. I don't think either one of us has done his name justice.
No,
but the brilliant poet. Yeah,
he's amazing. So this is a poem about being, in a sense, schooled by him in a beautiful way, and it's called Boxes. I'm in a group of writers sitting around a table in a hotel in Chapel Hill, wine and sparkling water at hand. The Odyssey has come up, and someone says something about the wandering hero. I quip, maybe that rock wasn't such a hard place. The elder at the table chimes in. There's a post-colonial read on Circe, Odysseus gets waylaid there, sure, but he's so sick and tired of the empire and is having way too much fun in the islands to ever want to leave. He has a way of laughing that makes everyone else smile, a kind of lilting manic rush of ha 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 with his eyes squeezed shut. Another writer looks up at the ceiling, frowning. The speaker over her head has been broadcasting moody violin music nonstop. She says, There hasn't been a major chord all night. Our first course has arrived. The hummus is literally steaming, it's so hot. The elder tells our end of the table that he hates how black writers are always being boxed in. Editors only approach me when it's about race, never about love or domestic life, just race. It's maddening. I ask him if he thinks this is true outside of Britain. Even worse, he says, laughing. Between bites, I wonder aloud, maybe you need to write in some other genre, like a mystery novel or something, to get them to stop stereotyping you. He shakes his head. Then they'll just box me inside the genre. He starts laughing again. He puts his hand on my arm, and when he opens his eyes, they are animated by a distinct sadness. I'm going to make you an honorary black man for a moment, if you don't mind. I nod enthusiastically. And so, as an honorary black man, I'd ask you to imagine being shot by the police and falling dead onto the pavement. Imagine the cops leaving your body there for 3 hours in the baking sun just to make sure everyone knows that they don't give a shit about any of you either. I lean in. Now imagine it again, but this time, and just as your body falls forward, you flip out into space and land on your feet in the future. I fall back against the booth seat as the elder smiles into his whiskey. My hotel is a short couple of blocks down the road. The night is warm like pond water with patches of cool and breeze. A faulty streetlight sputters. A car goes by, bass thumping. Get Low by Little John and the East Side Boys blasts through the open windows. The song chimes in my head as I walk. On the corner outside the hotel, before I have time to react, a woman rises from the bus stop bench and grabs me by the hand. Hey, get me a room up in there, she says. The man with her stays silent, stock still, as if sitting for a portrait. That's where you come from, right? You know, we were talking about futurism and in African American literature, and he brought that back to it in that kind of imaginary leap to the future. It just the headiness and the seriousness of the thinkers at Callu, it was stunning and also intimidating, and also very funny and friendly to be brought into that place and kind of told, I'm going to imagine you, I'm going to give you this honor, and now I'm going to kind of slap you in the back of the head a little bit, but now I'm going to give you a hug, all at the same time.
Well, a lot of laughter and a lot of tears, but also I think that, what you just described for me is the type of Black cultures, in the plural, that I know are very much like that. When unmasked, laughter, tears, a little chiding, a little reminder of this and that, but also I have always found various Black cultures to be very welcoming, which is why it's so shocking when I read literature that would have it any other way, or when I watch the news media that doesn't see that.
Yeah.
So I think one of the benefits of our friendship has been that we get to have cross-cultural talk, but we have real talk.
Yeah.
And then we get to talk back and forth through our pieces as well. So speaking of, there are 2 poems I want to hear.
Well, in terms of time, we're cutting it a little close. I'll read The White Dad Shoes if you read one more short poem. And I'm thinking about the other Asheville poem in that group you had.
Okay.
If you read that, I'll read The White Dad Shoes, then we'll close it out.
Okay, sounds good. Everywhere and here too, leaving Asheville, North Carolina again. I would like to say the wind doesn't move through me, that I don't respond to such things, that I don't stare at a field of flowers or pole beans or even the ubiquitous corn, that I don't feel the flatness of land with relief and want to run and run and run across it the way I want to cry in the woods, to cry without stopping because I can't imagine how someone might escape through them. Because I know I am descended from those who couldn't escape. Every place sets my teeth on edge. I take it all in like needles, like air whipped up my nostrils as it rounds the corner of a brick building, like a thumb in my mouth and honey from the jar on the end of it. The righteous and the wrong, all of it enters, the way bells enter the waiting car on a Sunday morning, or the birds that wake me when I'm sleeping by the window, or the moan of the neighbors or my own. How can you strike the balance when you can't separate yourself from anything or anyone? I'm not safe any place, and no place can save me. Just look at what the mountains have done to me. Exactly what the city did, and then some.
I love that poem. Great that you're reading new poems. I'll finish out. I think we're done for the coming up to the end of the hour. It's been fun. I think we could do this for another hour for sure. But this is a piece that is my son is kind of threaded throughout this book. He was 8 when we had the accident. He was about 13 when the book starts, and he's a teenager at the end of this book. He's finishing junior year. He's a senior now. So much of what I was experiencing around all these themes of trauma and disconnect, but also trying to deal with all the things that we're beginning to deal with the social injustice and racial injustice, and what's my stance, where do I stand, and how do I get out of white privilege, how do I move forward, be more of a not be such a get in the way, but be part of the solution, all that stuff. He would always kind of keep me humble and
Too humble.
and I would say, and I would say something about somebody and he'd make sure that I knew that he saw the real motive. So in some ways he was teaching me a little bit about how to move through trauma without even knowing it. So here's a moment where I let my son and his friend tease me, but we have a nice dialogue. It's called White Dad Shoes. The hip Italian sneakers purchased recently in Montreal have become in the minds of 14-year-old Avery and his best friend, white dad shoes. Avery's latest roasting insult, "You're such a white dad." It's not enough that friends keep complimenting me on my cool shoes. I've been nailed. I try to tease back by calling the boys white dad. Phoenix, I can't be white dad, I'm black. Me, but you're acting like a white dad. They shake their heads and walk upstairs. I lather on sunscreen before we go tubing and it gets stuck in my beard. Avery, you look like a demon with your red eyes and that sunscreen on your face. I moan at him like a ghoul and chase him into the water. Later, he comes out of his room with a complete mask of sunscreen. The boys explode in laughter at his parade of white face. On the way to the movies, I bring it up again. I am one of the least white dads you know. The boys look at each other with deadpan stares, then return to their games. That's just what a white dad would say. So I pump up the volume on Stevie Wonder's Boogie On Reggae Woman. Thank you guys for listening, and thank you, Vievee, for having this talk.
Thank you for having me, Sebastian. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your book.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate everything you did to help me write it and bring it out in the world. I love your new work, and we'll keep this conversation going.
Absolutely.
Toby, Monica, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a wonderful event. So glad to hear your conversation.
Yeah. Well,
It was so great.
All right. See you, everybody. Go watch the Clippers Nuggets.
I'm not going to do that. But
All right, bye, Vievee. Bye, Sebastian. Thank you.
bye.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Yeah, don't forget you can pick up Sebastian's book 30% off with the code HenHouseAtHome. You can find the link at redhen.org/virtual. And you can get that book and all of our fall books for 30% off. But that was really great. I really loved, it's kind of what Bianca Richards said on Facebook. She left a comment about how the best thing about virtual events is that you're invited to a conversation. And that is definitely my favorite part. I really loved kind of just being a fly on the wall, watching Sebastian and Vievee and their friendship and how well they gelled together. And then they were just like having a conversation, and it was so enlightening to see. And it was such an honor to kind of be exposed to that and their history and their friendship. So thank you so much to Vievee and Sebastian for this amazing event.
Truly, thank you. Okay. See you all next week for Rebecca McClanahan and Deborah Thompson. And thank you again for joining us.